Hey, Ben.
Hey, Jen.
What are you listening to this week? Welcome to season 6 of What Are You Listening To? The weekly podcast created to foster community through music by sharing the stories behind the songs that soundtrack our lives. Some of the songs are old, some new, all good. I'm Jenn Tully, and this week I'm joined by Ben Neill. Ben is a composer, performer, author, and inventor of the mutant trumpet, a hybrid electro-acoustic instrument. Wired magazine recognized him as a musical innovator who uses a schizophrenic trumpet to create art music for the people. In his engaging new book, Diffusing Music, released last month by Bloomsbury Press, Neill explores how technology is reshaping music, enabling unprecedented levels of creativity, and transforming how we share and experience sound. As always, Ben and I are going to get to know each other a little better through 4 songs. 2 are his picks and 2 are mine. Which songs do you think we're going to discuss? Tune into our conversation to find out. With that, let's get started. Ben, what are you listening to this week?
Okay, so the two songs that I chose were things that were from artists that influenced my whole journey into being a composer and creative musician from just being a straight trumpet player.
Okay.
And so the first one is called Moons of Titan. It's by John Hassell. And John was a kind of idol of mine
Okay.
who was very much an inspiration on me to do my own instrument, the mutant trumpet, and to pursue my own compositional ideas. He did several albums with Brian Eno in the
Okay.
late 70s, and I was really fascinated with the way that he was reinventing the sound of the trumpet, and also with his musical aesthetic, which was this very ambient drone kind of sensibility that I was interested in. Interestingly, the songs that I would have really chosen from the album that he did with Eno, the Fourth World Possible Musics album, are not on Spotify.
Oh,
Strangely, that album does not appear on Spotify. I assume it's some kind of licensing issue. But I chose one of his later tracks, Moons of Titan, which was recorded in 2020. And the story about John and me is that when I moved to New York City from Ohio in 1983 to pursue a graduate degree at Manhattan School of Music and to really pursue a career as a creator, I had written John a letter, way before email,
right.
physical letter, care of his record label. And lo and behold, he wrote back to me, and he became my mentor. He was really the first person that encouraged me to go forward with this idea that I had, which at that time was in its very nascent stages. So yeah, he and I had a really kind of a special, unique relationship in that I had been so much of an admirer of what he did from afar, but then he actually ended up being really tremendously helpful to me and offered me the encouragement and also introduced me to many of the musicians that I ended up working with all through the 80s and 90s and 2000s right up until today. So
Wow, that's so fantastic. And I love that story of sort of the personal connection of writing a letter and submitting it through the record label. I think we'll get into this a little bit more in the show when we're talking about the book and, specifically the subtitle of the book, which focuses on, the trajectory of sonic democratization, like music for everyone is sort of what that means to me. And so I think a lot of times we think, oh, now it's so easy just on social media to DM someone, so you have access to talent or celebrities in a way you never had before. Yet, there's something so special too about that personal connection of being able to sit down and handwrite a letter and communicate something really personal to someone that you admire. So I feel like that could be something juicy for us to get into a little bit later on in the show as well, because I love that when I hear stories of people sort of meeting their heroes and it going well. You know,
Yeah,
sometimes you hear the opposite, and so I love that access. I feel like in that sort of like mid 90s era, it felt like we were in this weird space where you did have access to sort of, you know, pen pals or relationships through letters. And then it kind of went away in the early stages of email when people weren't quite there. So I'm getting in the weeds here, but I love that's a focus of your book, sort of that,
yeah.
you know, there are tools now that are, even though we felt like it was harder to reach those people, maybe we could develop a personal connection more quickly in the old days, but now it's much easier to access people than it ever has been before. So I feel like that's an interesting thing to talk about, especially in the world of music, where, as we all know, you know, it is built on people working together. It is built on new music is influenced by music that came before it. You know, it is
Yep.
such an influential form of art, I feel like. And so it's an interesting concept to dig into. And I love this song that I was not familiar with John Hassell whenever you first sent this over. And then as I was digging into him, you know, Brian Eno comes up on the show so much. He's worked with so many people and been so instrumental in just development of what I think of as like a modern sound. So I loved getting into this and learning that they had collaborated. But I really liked this song. It was sort of like, I mean, I'm making up a genre here, but it was like soundscape jazz to me. You know,
Yeah,
like it took me
yeah.
to a place, and I'm such a lyrics person that this week really forced me to let go of that. I love it when, you know, a playlist for the show forces me to step outside of my comfort zone and experience something new. And I'm so traditionally driven by lyrics that I
Hmm.
love it when I can put that down and just let the song communicate to me in ways outside of lyrics. And this song did that so well.
Yeah, the other thing about John that was so important to me, and of course Brian Eno, very, you could say very much the same thing, is that while John was working with very advanced electronics at the time, he had been a an assistant to the German avant-garde composer Karlheinz Stockhausen going back into the 60s, and worked with Lamont Young a lot, the father of minimalism, who I've been working with ever since John introduced me to him. And I've performed a lot of his music over the years and studied with him. But what I like about the song that's really characteristic of John's music, and then again, I think you could also say it about Eno, is that it's bringing together these kind of experimental practices of music, but then putting them into a context with groove that
Mhm.
makes it more accessible. The problem that with a lot of the more experimental music that I find is that it oftentimes paints itself into a corner and becomes something that only other people that are making that kind of music want to listen to. And I think, Eno certainly, he's a really central figure in my book, and I have a lot of references to him. There's a whole chapter called "All Music is Ambient Music," but the way that he was able to bring these experimental traditions and ideas into the popular music context, that's really a central tenet of my whole artistic project, because I started doing my own music to get away from the classical music ghetto that I had kind of been in my early training, was growing up in. And John coined this term for his music called fourth world, which was the idea of just, it was really a label for that phenomenon that I'm describing, where he basically wanted to take these new technologies and then blend them with musical sonorities and grooves from uh, the like the southern hemisphere, from
Yeah.
less developed non-Western countries, and that so that kind of structure of these kind of drones, these ambient sonorities that are very interesting sonically, and then putting those over different types of grooves, that's really, very much characteristic of the music that I've done. On the other hand, I also never wanted to imitate John's too literally. I mean, there have always been associations made, and I, of course, never have minded that, and I celebrate my connection with him. But I've tried to sort of build off of that idea without making it, strictly purely imitative in a way.
Well, and I feel like you hit the nail on the head here too. Sometimes when you're delving into genres like this or super heady or even scholarly music, I think sometimes it feels pretentious or it feels inaccessible. Not one of the four tracks on today's playlist felt that way to me. They all felt like they were trying to invite everybody in. And even someone like me, who is a popular music fan, first and foremost, a lyrics girl at heart, I really was able to enjoy and take these songs for what they were and not have to work that hard. Do you know what I mean? Like
Well,
sometimes I have to really like drop in and work at it. These were so accessible, every single song on this playlist.
well, thank you so much. I take that as a real compliment, and as I say, it's something that I feel kind of distinguishes me a little bit from a lot of the other people that are working in this kind of experimental instrument space. That My whole goal has been to take the mutant trumpet and my own custom designed software and hardware, but to create music that people want to listen to. And honestly, a lot of academic music and art music of the like last half of the 20th century, I think people, they get so wrapped up, as you say, in the heady ideas of the music that they almost forget to listen to it,
Yeah,
and forget that music really is about creating an experience for the audience, and I think that's, in today's world with the superabundance of music, that is more true than ever. Yeah.
agreed. Agreed. Well, I feel like this is a great point too to like transition into your second song because this was a gem, a hidden gem that I am so happy you shared with me. I was not familiar, and this album is going to remain on rotation for me. So tell me your second song and the artist that sings it.
So the second song is called Forced Laugh, by the British group A Certain Ratio. It's from 1981. And I actually saw A Certain Ratio live in Chicago around the time this album came out, when I was touring in the Midwest with a new wave band that I was playing with at the time. And I was really into the whole British post punk musical scene at that time. And I was living in Northeast Ohio, where I had gone to undergraduate school. And I luckily found myself in the middle of this very vibrant punk new wave scene that had been the result mainly of Devo.
Yeah,
And also Chrissy Hine was from Akron,
yeah,
so there was this very cool club scene around it, and we're talking like late 70s, early 80s. And that was really the context in which I started doing my own music with the Mutant Trumpet. I really started out writing pop songs, playing guitar and singing, and then bringing with trumpet. And I was in a band where we switched instruments around a lot. And
wow,
but yeah, the Brian Eno connection, and it was funny because I would have normally, for the two songs, which it's a challenge to come up with just two songs, I would have chosen Brian Eno. But as I mentioned, the track with Hassell and Eno, those are just not available on Spotify. But the name of the band, A Certain Ratio, is a reference to a lyric in the Brian Eno song "The Third Wheel," from Taking Tiger Mountain by Strategy. So there's another Eno connection there.
yeah,
But the thing about this track that really just has, continually delights me is the way, well, there are a few things. The way the trumpet is used, it's
Hmm.
used in a very, the sound of the trumpet is, it's very processed. It's kind of blatty, like you almost don't know if it's a trumpet or not. And the way it's used is, it's very simple. The guy was not a great trumpet player, but the way it was used in the song made a great impression. And the album cover also was this beautiful hand drawn, like a painting, and
Yeah.
the trumpet was like a very central feature on the album cover. A Certain Ratio is still together, by the way. They're still performing. The album was on Factory Records, which was, Joy Division's label, and
Yep.
a lot of that, the really most important British post punk stuff came out of that, and all of that music was incredibly influential on me. Echo and the Bunnymen, the Teardrop Explodes,
Yes.
all of those early 80s British bands, and they were all working with a kind of minimalist reductionist way of making music. Very simple parts, usually kind of stacking up together. So really the elements of the song are quite simple. But there are these rhythmic things going on that are really fascinating. There's this kind of tapping. I think he's tapping on the side stick of the snare, dot
Yeah.
dot 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 dot. And what's happening with that is the and this is something that I'm very interested in my music, really coming out of minimalism, Steve Reich, Philip Glass, like that kind of thing, where the groove of the song is going along in straight, like a straight beat, but that the time signature of that little rhythm that's on top is shifting all the time. So it starts out in 7, then they change it to 7 and 8, and then you have this just kind of sustaining drones, like a feedback guitar thing that's kind of going all the way through it, and these kind of bass riffs. So it's very stripped down music. And that's one of the things to me that I always look for in my own music, and also in evaluating the music of other people. It also goes back to John. One of the first things John said to me when I came to him and said, "Hey, I'm starting to do my own music. What can you tell me?" And he said, "Well, it's always about taking away." He's like, "You're a sculptor.
Mm.
You go into the studio, you chip at the stone, and you think you can't take any more off of it, but then you come back the next day and you say, oh, I could take some more off of that." So this idea of boiling things down to their essence. And I find that in today's music, we are living in a time where it's so tempting to just throw in everything but the kitchen sink, because it's so easy to do.
Yeah.
And to me, that kind of musical expression is not so interesting usually, because I really value the idea of making the most out of the least. And I think that track is definitely exemplifies that. It also has a kind of dark, brooding sort of quality to it, which I think, most of my music, tends to have that kind of sensibility as well. So yeah, it was in thinking about it, I think it represents, really, those two tracks really represent where I came out of, but they're, to me, they're just as alive. The Hassell track is a much newer song, but
Right.
I mean, I knew Hassell and was engaged with him at the same time, that around the time in the early 80s that the Certain Ratio track came from.
I was just shocked that this song was from 1981.
Yeah,
When
right?
a new
Yeah.
song comes to the show, I just listen to it. I just enjoy it. I just live with it for a minute before I go and do any research. And when I learned this was from 1981, I was literally Googling again to make sure I got that right. I could not believe it. And the song kept surprising me. That bass line that sounds like it could be right out of a Red Hot Chili Peppers song.
Yeah.
The chanting, you mentioned it earlier, that constant beat that almost sounds like a metronome at
Yeah.
times and
Yeah.
Morse code in others. I was like, I wonder if there's something being communicated there. Is it because it sounded so um it reminded me so much of Morse code that I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, this is so interesting. And so I
Right.
just kept, every time I listened, I felt like I was going on a journey, and it felt so modern for being a 44-year-old song. I
Yeah.
couldn't believe it.
I'm glad. I'm glad that but the thing is I listened back to it again, which, after having not listened to it for a while, it also struck me that while, the way we're talking about it, it might sound like, oh, it's like some kind of like very abstract thing or not,
Not at
or
all.
something, but it actually does follow a pop song form. It has a kind of verse chorus structure, even
Mhm.
though it's primarily instrumental. I mean, there's a little bit of vocals, but it
Yeah.
does have a kind of verse chorus structure with a bridge kind of form. So again, it's this idea of introducing more experimental ideas into a popular music format. So what does that mean, experimental, when we say that? I think what it means, you really hit on something that I find is very important and in music. And, I've also been a professor of music for about 20 years. And, one of the main things that I find is valuable to teach students is this idea that what generates excitement and emotion in music is when we are surprised by something.
Mhm.
That's what brings us back to be able to want to listen to something over and over again, even after we have listened to it and we know what's coming. But that there are these, that when an artist, a composer, a songwriter, whatever, and it is able to do something that violates or challenges our expectations of what's going to happen next, that is gold in music. No one can say, well, what is the formula for writing a hit song? But this idea is in the field of music cognition, which is about 50 years old, but has really gained a lot of cred in the last years. And it's a way of trying to look at music as a whole that's not stylistically oriented. So, in other words, whatever the style is, it could be a simple house track, like the most minimal techno,
Yeah.
minimal house. But within that context, the artist, if the artist introduces things that are surprising, that make us think, that yeah, like make us go, oh, that's the key. And of course, it has to work within the style. If you're playing a house track and then all of a sudden you go into avant-garde noise, it's probably not going to work. There's
Right.
the style of the music like kind of dictates what the threshold for that is.
Well,
But yeah.
and there was some comfort too in, like you said, the formula of it being sort of like a chorus to,
Yeah.
or like a verse to a bridge to a chorus. Like I found that comforting as well. And also to the tension and release. You get a
Yeah.
little bit of that. That's something that I love in music as well, where you get sort of that build up, the payoff, and then it brings you back down and
Oh,
takes you to a place.
absolutely.
So
The
I,
the
I
the
think
sort of the sort
that
of yeah, go ahead.
that like formulaic like backdrop to something that sounded really surprising worked well for me.
One of the greatest books I think about music of the last few years was Derek Thompson's Hit Makers.
Mm.
And he talked in there a lot about this idea of called Maya, Maya. It's an acronym. It has nothing to do with like the Indian philosophy of Maya. And it came from this 20th century designer. It's called Most Advanced Yet Acceptable. And what it
Mm.
means basically is that we all like things that are familiar, but we all crave something new, right? So I think a lot of what music making is it's finding that balance between something that is familiar enough to people, a groove, a song form, or something like that they can hold on to, but then yet introducing something that they haven't heard before.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect way to sort of summarize that. And I like I said, I kept going back like as soon as I discovered that To Each album, that's the name of the album that this track appears on, I just fell in love with the whole thing. I mean,
Yeah.
I think it's so worth diving into. And again, I went to the University of North Texas, which has a really big jazz program. And so I was exposed to some of the world's greatest jazz musicians now. I was able to see in college in the 1 o'clock lab band and things like that playing around town. And, that was always cool to sort of find something that was a gem. I learned, I got a lot of my musical influences from a lot of my friends that were in the jazz program. I talk a lot about Django Reinhardt. I'm a
Hmm.
huge fan of classical guitar. And so this one was one where I was like, oh man, I wish I would have known this. Like if I could have dropped this album on those guys back in the day, I would have been the big winner, because I thought it was just such a find from beginning to end. I enjoyed the whole album.
Yeah, North
Um,
Texas is legendary for
yeah.
its music school for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a really fantastic. I was there in the early 90s and it was just such a great time to be there. So many fantastic musicians that have gone on to do really wonderful things.
A guy that was a really close friend of mine, I actually played in a rock band in high school with, Chris Dean,
uh,
was a percussion teacher there. He unfortunately passed away at an early age a few years ago. But
mm,
yeah, it is it's world renowned for,
yeah.
particularly for its jazz program, but for all of its whole music program.
Yeah, that jazz program is second to none. And
Yeah.
since you mentioned a percussionist there, for those that are fans of the movie Whiplash, it's said that the J.K. Simmons character in that movie was based on one of the percussion professors in the jazz program at North
Oh, okay.
Texas. So,
Oh, wow. Okay.
yeah. Um,
That was part one of Jenn's interview with Ben Neill. Come back next week to hear part two and Jenn's picks.